Just a couple of quick warnings. This video is going to be discussing Deltarune Chapter 2 and the events that take place within it in pretty intrinsic detail. There's going to be a lot of spoilers, so if you haven't played it yet and you want to, I recommend turning the video off now and going to go play that again. I'll also be talking about parts of Chapter 1 and even bits of Undertale. That said, this is a completely unscripted video, so I may pause and ramble a little bit here or even repeat myself, so please bear with me. All of that said, I'm going to start the official content in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I was listening to Spamton Neo's theme, Big Shot, the other day, and I noticed something that I hadn't before. During the bit where the lyrics are kind of mumbled, it's really hard to hear, especially over the action of the gameplay, but the mumbled lyrics are, "Please Knight, please pick up the phone. Please Knight, ha ha ha." Now, that sounds a lot like Spamton's, especially because of the laughter, general way of speaking. And being his theme song, it's fair to assume that's from his perspective. All of that said, I feel like this leads to W.D. Gaster of Undertale fame being a red herring. So with Jevil and Spamton G Spamton, we find out both characters came into contact with a quote-unquote certain someone, and both of them were driven insane as a result. With Jevil, he learned things he wasn't supposed to know, and to quote Sham, which yes, that's how you pronounce Seam's name, his view of the world became dark, darker, yet darker still. Now, in the Undertale soundtrack, and this is speculation, I could be incorrect, please correct me in the comments if I am wrong. That is the name of a theme in the Undertale soundtrack that never actually plays anywhere in the game. Mix that with all of the rumors and theories that go around about Gaster, most of the fandom has just kind of accepted that Dark, Darker, Yet Darker is the theme song for W.D. Gaster. I feel like, while that may be true for Undertale, Sham was possibly unintentionally leading us astray. Namely because we know Jevil and Spamton have had some kind of interaction with one another, based off Spamton's line that he's going to surpass that clown around town. We also know Sham is aware of Spamton's existence, so it kind of really lends itself to these characters have at least interacted in the past. With Jevil, his insanity took the form of he can do anything. The world has no consequences, there's no reason for him to behave himself anymore, basically, and he became obsessed with the idea of freedom. Now, when Jevil came into contact with this mysterious individual isn't entirely certain, other than it happened very, very long before the events of Deltarune. Very long being a assumption. We don't know exactly how long. Later on, in Chapter 2, with Spamton, we find out that Spamton was a failing advertisement bot. He was a spam email bot for all intents and purposes, and because he was the rip-off send money to the prince in Arabia to get your access to millions from his bank account, Spamton was never very successful. Until one day, he picked up the phone and called somebody, or rather was called by them, quoting his friend. This, again, leads to Spamton going basically insane. He becomes very, very successful overnight, skyrockets past his other advertisement friends to the point where they become jealous and abandon him, and then ultimately one day, the phone stops ringing. Spamton's sales go down the drain, and he ends up living in a dumpster, driven completely batshit insane by his rise and fall. Again, he's obsessed with the themes of freedom. And during his battle with Chris, he's repeatedly telling them that they are a puppet on strings. They, like him, are not free. However, it's the lyrics in the song that bother me. Again, please, Knight, pick up the phone. We know through the Queen that the Dark Fountain was made by the Knight, who plunged their blade into the earth, creating the Dark Fountain. And then, by playing the game, we find out that Chris may very well be the Knight. Again, this is where huge spoilers come in. If you've watched this far and you want to see the ending to Deltarune Chapter 2 yourself, please stop here. But during the ending sequence, after Susie and Toriel have fallen asleep, Chris removes our control from them, walks to the middle of the room, opens the front door for some reason, turns the TV on, and then plunges their knife into the living room floor, creating a dark fountain. They then take a seat, pick the heart back up, and the last thing we see is darkness flooding the screen. Now, if this implies that Chris is the Knight, then that also means Chris is the Knight being referenced in Spamton's song. Now, this raises a lot of interesting questions. If Chris is the Knight, how on earth were they in contact with Jevil and Spamton? Why doesn't Jevil recognize Chris when talking about the Knight? How did Chris contact these two characters, and what did they do that drove Jevil and Spamton insane? How was Chris influencing them? Well, my working theory at the moment, and I could be completely wrong, Toby Fox could be playing me for a total fool, is that Chris inadvertently was influencing these characters. Spamton is considered by the fandom to be represented in the light world by a recycling bin filled with spam emails. In the light world, there is also a single computer in the computer lab that has been blue screen of death. Now, my takeaway from this, and I could be totally overthinking it, is that Chris may have at some point, because we know they are mischievous and a bit of a troublemaker, gone into the computer room, sat down at that particular computer, and began just clicking on every spam email link they could find. And then, once the computer, bugged down by viruses, completely broke, they just kind of picked up and left. Their mischief was managed, they got their kick, and they were done for the day. The spam emails being printed out being kind of like a paper trail, proof that they got into some shenanigans, if nothing else for the audience. This would correlate really well with Spamton as a character and what happened with them. Chris clicking on all the different emails gave Spamton popularity, and then when Chris stopped and walked away, the quote-unquote phone stopped ringing, and Spamton fell from grace. Now this would allow Chris to, as the Knight, make Spamton relevant without Spamton ever actually seeing or interacting with Chris. Likewise, with Jevil, Chris could again have influenced Jevil in the light world in some capacity without necessarily physically interacting with Jevil in the dark world. My only assumption on that front could be that Chris removed the Joker card from the deck and intentionally locked it somewhere dark. Now, that is admittedly a bit of a stretch. We don't know what Jevil saw and learned that drove him insane. And we don't know why this happened. Sham also takes the credit for sealing Jevil away. So it's hard to say for sure that Chris is related in some capacity to the Joker card being removed from the deck. But we do know there is a physical deck that makes up all the playing card themed enemies in Chapter 1. So there has to be a Joker card somewhere, and that is in some way related to Jevil. Likely, the card is still in one piece. Something else to take away from all of this is that both Jevil and Spamton, after being defeated, turn into items that get added to the player's inventory. And, depending on the dialogue you pick, Rousey will comment that Spamton decided to be their ally. Now, mix this with Task Manager noticing the Jevil items, whether it's the Devil's Axe or the Jevil Tail, it does lend itself really well to both of these characters are still alive in some capacity, even if not functioning on their own. we have the implication that Jevil is still alive in the violent route because he comments, "Take me with you and do your strongest," before adding the Devil's Knife to the inventory for Susie to use. We also know that Jevil can metamorphosis into the Devil's Knife. We see him do it several times during the fight. So it's not entirely impossible to imagine that Jevil is still alive, just in a state of dormancy in some capacity or another. He does say he's going to sleep for the other 100 years. Now, whatever that means is a completely different beast for a completely different time. Likewise, after being defeated, Spamton comments on how strong you are, and that they may be able to cut their strings even if he wasn't able to. And again, turns into an item, enters the player's inventory, and again, Rousey comments, "They became an ally." So it seems pretty plausible that Spamton is in some capacity still alive, just in a dormant state. Who's to say that Spamton can't even come back later on? Possibly as an ally, as we see in his final moments, he's quite lucid. Unless there's the Easter egg where your inventory's full, but I don't think that's supposed to be canon. But that's basically all I wanted to talk about. The theory crafting on W.D. Gaster may very well be not an Easter egg, although we don't know who the mysterious voice speaking to us at the very, very, very beginning of Chapter 1 when we're making our quote-unquote vessel is. And again, the fandom has widely accepted the idea that that may be Gaster. I get the feeling that Gaster doesn't have as much to do with Jevil and Spamton, if anything at all. And Shawm has implied that they know who the third super boss is going to be, which continues the trend. If this next boss also talks about freedom in some capacity, then I believe it may be more than just a coincidence, because there's a lot of overlapping between Jevil and Spamton. And Shawm, knowing both of them. But with all of that said and all of my rambling out of the way, I'd like to hear what you guys think. If anybody watched this video, please feel free to comment and talk to me about what you think of my theory that Chris has in some capacity influenced Jevil and Spamton rather than Gaster being the one to do it. Thank you guys very much for watching. I have been your Lord Zanas, and I will see you next time.